Hello again and welcome back to another lesson of Lindsay Setchell's It's Not Rocket Science when it comes to horse and hoof care. Now, just recently we put a post out on our Facebook page. If you haven't seen it, go back and have a look, of the progression and rehab of a mare who had quite a lot of separation in her foot, and we showed you the rehab, the safe rehab, all the way through a whole hoof cycle. Well, we're nearly there. We've got about one more trim cycle to do. If you haven't seen it, pop back and have a look at our Facebook page. Now, it always causes a bit of a furore on Facebook and on social media, mainly because we have what looks like this ugly long toe. And the equine world, right at this moment in time, is really struggling in embracing that healing long toe, because they think it's long and the horse is going to trip and they're going to be lever forces and it's going to cause strain and it's going to cause sprain and it's going to cause problems. That horse isn't going to be comfortable, it's going to make things worse for the horse. Well, if you stick around in this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and why it doesn't do that. But I want to talk to you about 4 things in this lesson. The first one I want to talk about is, why is hoof care so darn confusing at the moment? Well, we've put the cat amongst the pigeons, haven't we? Because we've been doing this trim to Mother Nature's constants for a very, very long time. But I think that a lot of people are only just really starting to get wind of it. Now it's starting to pick up because we have far more students now. We have quite a lot of clients that are all over the place having fantastic rehabs and recoveries with their laminitis. So we're going to talk about why hoof care is so confusing. We're also going to talk about the value of research. The value of research. That's important. Let's put an of in there. We're going to talk about the value of research. How valuable is it? Is it relevant today? Something that we did 20 years ago. And we're also going to be talking about making assumptions about hoof care, because that is something that happens a great deal by a lot of people that haven't done very many studies. We've done quite a lot now, and it's something that people do a lot when it comes to hoof care. They see something and they make an assumption that something else is happening, when in actual fact it's not that at all. It isn't. So we're going to be talking about that. In fact, as we go through it, we'll be really talking about assumptions. And then the 4th thing we're going to talk about today is something quite special that we have got coming up on the horizon, which I think you'll find really interesting. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to be talking about, let's get rid of my rocket. We're going to be talking about why hoof care is so confusing. Let's leave that up there for the time being. So here I am. Here's my very confused face. And I'm an owner, look, and I haven't got a clue. Because I've been hearing about this long toe method, and I've also been hearing about the chop the toes off method. And I'm like, I don't know which one I'm meant to go with. Well, let me discuss both of these methods. So we're lumped into this group here. This is us. This is definitely not us. We're not the chop the toe off. So this is us. This is our ordinary foot, and here is P3. There it goes. There we go. And that's a pretty standard looking ordinary foot. There's no long toe on there, and this is the foot that we want to achieve. Okay, this is the foot. We want everything to be as Mother Nature wants the foot to be, how she designed it, how she evolved it over 55 million years. Now there's another form of hoof care where you have the same foot like this, but because you're a bit terrified of something called lever forces, you tend to spend your time panicking about the toe and constantly taking the toe away. Also at the same time, you tend to leave the heels higher than Mother Nature wanted them to be, how Mother Nature designed them to be. And we see this all the time when we go out to clients' horses, because we see those heels and we see those bars and we see them above the hard sole plane, because we trim to the hard sole plane, which is Mother Nature's constant. That's us. This is us. Us, HM. Boop. And over here, chopping off the toes and leaving the heels too high isn't us. That is, quite frankly, traditional hoof care. And that hasn't got us very far over the last few centuries. So this is traditional hoof care. And how does traditional hoof care work? Well, we do something called PPT. And that PPT is personal, there's the P, preference, there's the other P, trimming. And that is most definitely not us. That's the PPT. Because it's actually a lot of the time down to the hoof care professional and what he feels or she feels is the right thing for that foot. Now that's dangerous. Because if you have a hoof care professional going, I think that the toes need to be taken back more, or the heels need to be left higher, you're starting to play around with something which is the most incredible feat of engineering that Mother Nature designed. And you shouldn't do that, but it happens all the time. Many horses we come across actually would have quite a nice foot if the heels were left as they should be and they weren't left high and they left the toe where they should be. So we've got the hard sole plane, Mother Nature's constant, and this is the side where we're into PPT, personal preference trimming. And you can line up a bunch of hoof care professionals and each one will do a slightly different trim. One of them might leave a little bit more on the bars, another one might leave a little bit more heel height. Today they feel that they're going to leave for this horse 2 mil. Last time they left 5 mil. Not only do they do that, we may leave more at the quarters. We might not take them down to the hard sole plane and therefore we leave more bars because the bars are attached to the heels because it's part of the hoof wall. And then when we get to the toe, well, it's anybody's guess how much toe we're going to take off. Some take off a lot, some relieve the toe a little bit, some take it all the way into the white line and some even take it right back to the sole. Which means that poor old horsey is now walking around on that part of his foot. So in this scenario here, where we've just followed the hard sole plane, we have that amount of surface area for the horse to walk on. Unfortunately, in this scenario, we have now shortened the surface area that the horse walks on, and that's important. That's really, really important, and we could do another lesson on surface area and how that affects the horse. So this is the situation we have. We have two main methods. We have the traditional method where we're absolutely obsessed with taking the toe back because we want this to conform here. Now we want it to conform to something called the HPA, okay? That is the hoof pastern axis. And the hoof pastern axis is when we have the pastern and the hoof all in line, because in a normal healthy foot, it will be in line. And this is how many people are taught, but there's a big, massive problem with trimming to the HPA. And by that, I mean always trying to keep the dorsal wall in line with the pastern. There's a massive problem with that. And the problem is that over 90% and more of horses that are out in the domestic world have not got very normal hoof capsules. They have distorted hoof capsules to one extreme or another. They have separation, they have chronic laminitis, they have issues with their hooves. So therefore, trimming to the HPA, which would be on a normal foot, wouldn't work, but it still happens. They still do it. They still trim to the HPA. In order to do that, you have to raise the heels. You have to keep going up with the heels to make sure you are doing this with the hoof capsule and you're dumping this area here. It's very common. We see it all the time, everywhere. My board's going to go, I think. We see it everywhere, all the time. I mean, constantly. We go out and that's the foot we see all over the place. And if you're at a yard, you're at a barn, you're at a livery yard, perhaps it's even your horse that has feet like that. They're everywhere and they're shortened and they look boxy and they're no good for the horse at all. And in actual fact, it tends to happen on the fronts more than it happens on the backs. They do this to the front feet all the time. So that's one of the reasons that front feet have so many problems, is because of this kind of traditional hoof care. So why is this happening? Well, we've told you that it's the HPA. This is the way that they've been trimmed. They have to trim to the hoof pastern axis, but that is no good as a guide, because that guide has now fallen on its face for over 90% of the horses that we deal with in the domestic world, because they have some form of pathology or sickness with their hoof. The other guide they use is the widest part of the frog. Really, we're not going to talk too much about that, but the problem with that is that doesn't work either, because the frog is atrophied. By that I mean it's sick most of the time. It could be contracted. It has issues. So here we are trimming to guidelines that are not fixed. They're not constant. They're not something that you can do with every single foot, because so many feet are sick. But unfortunately, it is what people do. They trim like that. And then they will find that they will leave the heels a little bit high. Perhaps a hoof care professional has come along, hasn't sorted the diet and management out with their owner, and then they trim down to the hard sole plane and the horse seems a little bit sore. And they're like, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. And from that day forward, that hoof care professional never ever trims down to the hard sole plane. Not that they probably did in the first place, but they don't. Because they're worried the horse is going to get sore. Because we still have this big thing that we in the hoof care world, and here it is, I'm going to draw it, that we have a magic rasp. That is a bit like some kind of wand. We have a magic rasp, which is a wand. No, we don't. No, we don't. And if any hoof care professional tells you that they can come along to your foot when your horse has got chronic laminitis, navicular, and the various other issues that horses always deal with, and they say to you, if we reshape the foot in this way, or let's put some wedges in here, or then they've gone down the magic rasp route. We don't do the magic rasp route. We do, here she is, living in her heart, Mother Nature. Mother Nature 4HM. That's how we do it. That is us. Oh my God, my board is knackered. So let's move on, shall we? Let's talk a little bit more about the sick hoof. So we're going to still keep these up here, the traditional hoof care and our hoof care, but for this moment in time we're going to call the long toe method, because that's what people are calling it, and this is the cut the toe off method. So now let's look at a foot that was talked about very recently on social media as an example of why you don't leave a long toe. And this foot looked kind of like this, and I'm gonna kind of draw it. Okay, now that doesn't look too bad to start with, but actually this foot was very, very sick. So its coronary band was kind of down here. We had P2 coming in like this, and then we had P3 coming in, and this was P3. And there's the terminal arch all the way down here. Now this is a very sad, sick foot, because what's happened here is we've lost the majority of the pedal bone. Well, a good third of it. And here we have a completely confused, particularly down here, mess of stuff that is just going on in that part of the toe. It is a confused bunch of tissue that once was a lamella wedge and now is just a mess. This confused bunch of tissue is on this long foot. Now this foot was shown on social media as an example of why you don't leave the toes long, because the person who was doing the talk said that if you leave the toe like this, it's basically going to cause that, because it's got awful lever forces, and that is causing problems inside the foot, and that is going to cause these issues we see here, and it's terrible. Well, that, my friends, is not correct, because that had nothing to do with the toe. The toe was just an example of the separation that was being caused by constant laminitis that had never been dealt with. Laminitis that had never been dealt with. And let's just change pen's colour a minute. Let's have a bit of a change of pen colour. So this foot had acute and chronic over the years to get to this stage here. A lot of pain this horse suffered from, so that its pedal bone was basically removed. Now, like I said, that can't happen with lever forces. What actually happens is something called osteonecrosis. Now, we've talked about this before. I have done a whole lesson talking about this. Please go back onto the HM Facebook page to see it, and you'll understand more about osteonecrosis. Now, osteonecrosis is caused because of something called ischemia. Now, ischemia is blood loss. Basically, how a bone is not being supplied anymore by blood. Not only is it not being supplied by blood, but it's also not being supplied by the nutrients and, of course, oxygen. It ain't getting any. And so consequently what happens is, and this will be a laugh if I can do this here. There is my skull. We have bone death. And that's what happens because we have bone, which is the osteo, and the necrosis, which means it is dying. And that is what has happened to that bone. It has died. Now, it didn't die because there were lever forces. No, that's not what happens. And anyway, we've kind of proved that as being not true. There are no extraordinary lever forces on a horse's foot, because if that was the case, there is absolutely no way that we could rehab a horse the way that we do to Mother Nature's constants and allowing that toe to grow out. So what happens is this bone dies through constant bouts of laminitis, constantly having bouts of laminitis because of one major thing: the diet. The diet was never got on top of, and so consequently this poor horse suffered for many years as it lost its pedal bone. Also, the hoof care in many of these cases isn't right too, because that hoof care has employed a lot of this, PPT, personal preference trimming, which, like I said before, is a bit of an issue. So here we have a bone that is being lost. And the example that we were given is, if you leave the toe like HM does to Mother Nature's constants, you're going to cause this. No, that's not what's actually going to happen. And that is a huge assumption by somebody who's never trimmed to Mother Nature's constants. This board's going to drive me mad because it's swinging about. So we're not going to go into a great big amount of detail about how this all happens, etc., but just suffice to say that this is caused by this ischemia. It's caused by this blood loss. It is not by the fact that there's so much pressure coming up through the sole, and guess what does that, folks? Chopping the toes off is a big reason for that. And as this pressure comes up through the sole, the pressure from that bone means that that bone doesn't have any more blood supply to it, and it dies. Now, if we come across a horse that has been suffering from laminitis for a long time, do you know what we do? We ask for x-rays, because that's important. We want to see the state of P3 inside, because once we've seen the state of P3, we can make decisions on whether we feel that it's the right thing to do to carry on with that horse. If we see that a horse is in this kind of situation, I'm afraid, as sad as it is, that horse cannot live any quality of life. And it's appalling. Because do you know what's really appalling? Humans did that. Humans did that. Not the horse. Don't let anybody tell you that the reason that horse's foot looks like that was just because he's just one of those horses. No. That was the humans not knowing anything about diet and doing an awful lot of that. Personal preference trimming and not understanding the diet of the horse. And this is rife. This is the traditional equine world, and it is so sad, and we are seeing more and more of that. I have my theories as to why this is increasing in the horse world, why we're seeing more and more of this, but that's probably for another lesson. Anyway, we move on. So that was telling you about what actually happens when you have a foot that has got half of its bone missing. It wasn't because it had a long toe. It was because the diet and the management were wrong. All right, so now we come to the way that we rehab horses. And here's P3 in here. It hasn't been lost. There is no osteonecrosis going on, so it's okay. We can rehab this horse and we can get on with it. And I want to see a horse rehabbed in 1 year. I don't want to see it take longer than that. In fact, what happens is each year, once you get through the first main hoof cycle, year on, year out after that, the hoof just gets healthier and healthier and healthier and healthier. Always supposing that you stick to the diet and the management and you keep it species specific. Okay, and that is what we do. As HMB pros, we come along and we teach you all about that. That's what we do. And of course, we also do this and we also trim. But this is massive because this is the owner's job and this is 2/3 of the issue that horse is dealing with. And the hoof care is 1/3. So here we have this long toe method that we're all freaking out about because we think, my goodness, that we're going to have lever forces. Well, we can prove there aren't lever forces because we would never get a healing angle coming in. And this is the healing angle coming in. And this is what happens gradually, each time there's a trim, the foot starts to grow out this long toe. And yes, do you know something? It is ugly. It's not pretty. And the equine world's got to get used to ugly because they don't want to see the ugly. They're frightened of the ugly because they think of lever forces and a bunch of other things that basically just aren't true. And how do I know it doesn't work? Because in my career, I've literally done a 360. I started off right back here, the natural way. And then I got a bit lost as I was going along. And now I didn't get hugely lost, but a little bit lost as I went round and I played around a bit and I went down the road of a little bit of PPT. Not too much, but enough. And then I carried on and I'm like, I'm starting to see that doesn't work because I would get moderate success with chopping toes off. And believe me when I tell you my version of chopping toes off and the industry standard of chopping toes off is not the same. But I would get some moderate success, but it never made me feel comfortable letting the horse walk around on that main pressure point under the sole at the toe. It just didn't seem right when I know that no horse would ever do that to their own foot. And there was a bunch of other things too. I didn't feel right with just leaving the bars as they folded over and caused many issues with the bars. So I ended up going a full 360 until I came right back to here and went, you know what I need to do? I need to get out of the way of Mother Nature and the healing pathway because that will do itself. That will heal. Oh, come stay still. Because the healing pathway is everything. And if you get out of the way and you let the healing pathway do its thing and you believe in Mother Nature's constants, this will happen. Now, this is something you need to know, guys. We don't go around going, let's leave horses' toes really long. They are what they are, and we have to have that hoof wall down on the ground, no matter what. But if there is separation there, so the hoof wall's looking really crazy, we are there saying to the owner, you have to fix this. You have to fix the diet and the management, because if you don't, we will never even ever see that first part after about 8 weeks, this healing angle coming in with the natural pastern. We'll never see it happening. Because if we don't see this happening after about 8 weeks, we know that the owner isn't doing their end of the bargain. They're 2/3 of what needs to be done. So we have more conversations with the owner until we can finally get them into a situation where this horse is now on its healing pathway and growing out its toe. And in fact, it ends up doing a bit of this. In fact, this is more what actually happens in the end, because there's not enough material down here. And I've talked about that in previous lessons. So that's why we do what we do. Now you need to know that there are no lever forces that are going to tear that horse's foot off. There are none. And that is really important, because when you do this and you rehab like this, horses are more comfortable. Absolutely 100% more comfortable. Obviously, because they're not walking around on their sole, and their foot is in the right position because their bony column is in the right position. If you do it the other way and you continually chase the HPA, the hoof pattern access, and you chop off toes and you raise the heels, then you're going to have a bony column that's not in the right position, and then we go straight back to that horse that had that osteonecrosis and a bunch of other problems too. All right, I hope that cleared that up. Now, let's very quickly talk about the value of research, because we're running out of time. We've been around for ages. So let's talk about the value of research. Please don't listen when somebody talks to you and quotes research that is 20 plus years old. Now, the equine world in the last 2 years is moving fast. It's going very, very, very fast. We've forgotten about this because this was 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, we didn't take barefoot horses and really looked at them as a cohort. No. We took horses that were kept in unnatural conditions. And in fact, right till this day, research still does that, with far too many variables, far too many different hoof care methods in terms of chopping toes off, leaving heels high, putting shoes on, remedial shoes, etc., etc. So research, be very careful what research you read. Now, recently, we've had some fantastic research with Peder Fredriksson and Lars Ropstroff from the Swedish University of Agriculture and Agria Insurance. Now, they are, be warned, folks, if an insurance company is getting into research on horses, they're only doing it for one reason, which is to save them cash, to save them the big dollars. And what they're finding is that the new research they're doing on barefoot horses, particularly competition horses, is showing that, in fact, they have fewer problems. They do have fewer problems, and that means less money that they're paying out, which means that premiums are going to go up for people that keep their horses in a non-natural way. Maybe not right now, but mark my words, that is why an insurance company is getting in on the game. And I'm glad they are, because they need to be looking at this kind of research, not research that's 20 years old on a bunch of horses that aren't kept naturally and are not fed naturally and not trimmed naturally. And 20 years ago, they didn't know what they know now with Peder, Lars and Agria doing their research. So that's a little bit about research. Be careful about going, oh, have you done any peer-reviewed research? The answer to that is barely anybody has when it comes to barefoot horses. That last thing I wanted to talk about making assumptions. What does making assumptions do? You've heard it. It makes an ass out of you and me. So let's not make assumptions, folks. Let's stick to science and what we know, and let's stick to observation. When I started all those years ago and I did all of the things that I never do now, and I now work to Mother Nature's constants, I did it because I observed and I saw better results. In fact, nowadays, we don't have results that crash. We have successes all the way along the line as long as the owner stays on board with the diet and the management. And before that, I would get moderate success. Moderate's not good enough. Moderate is not good enough. What we need is a very, very high rate of success. And in the equine world, sadly, there is a very low rate of success. And that has got to change. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about something very, very special that is coming to the equine world, and we all need to be very excited about it. We can't go around calling what we do the long toe method, because that does not do what we do justice at all. Because people just go, we're the people that leave toes long. No, we're the people that rehab horses' hooves by allowing the toe wall to be on the ground so that we've got good feedback, and also because it's Mother Nature's constants that we're working with and because that's what the horse would do. But we can't go around the world calling it that. So we are bringing you, the world, something called the Phoenix Way. Learn to spell Phoenix, folks, because you're going to see it everywhere. The Phoenix Way. Look out for it, because that is what we follow. That is what we do. We do the Phoenix trim because we follow the Phoenix Way, and you need to start looking out for that because it's very, very, very exciting that owners can be part of, learning so much more about real, true hoof care. So I hope you enjoyed that lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Look out for the Phoenix.